Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to start this way. Okay. I've been thinking a lot about, or meditating on the concept of justice, right? What it means. And I think I've kind of come to the belief that justice is just a word, right? And it's a word that people often use to get what they want, right? Justice for all is a term that was used by our founding fathers here in the United States, and it's what Rocky Anderson is now using in his bid for presidency. The word justice has been used by Nazis and socialists. It has no intrinsic value in and of itself. It's a word that anybody can use for their own means, for their own purposes. Anyways, I wanted to lead off with that. Think about that. We'll come back to that. But right now, I'd like to go through kind of a biography of Rocky Anderson. He first ran for political office in 1996 as the Democratic nominee for Congress in Utah. He actually lost that bid to Merrill Cook, who I think a lot of us know. He only got 42.4% of the vote. Merrill Cook got 55. That was in the 2nd Congressional District. Then in '99, 3 years later, he ran for mayor of Salt Lake City, and he won with 60% of the vote. Then he served 2 terms. So he served from 2000, after he won the election, to 2008. The Olympics was in 2002, and I think this was kind of a defining moment, or it did define his entire mayoral career. It was during this Olympics that obviously Mitt Romney was the CEO of the Salt Lake Organizing Committee for the Olympics, and Rocky Anderson actually made like a really good friendship with Mitt Romney, and they worked together to put on the Olympics. The year of the Olympics, 2002, was when Mitt Romney had his gubernatorial race in Massachusetts. Rocky Anderson came out in favor of Mitt Romney, and actually Mitt Romney's campaign ran TV ads all across Massachusetts with Rocky Anderson saying, I've been called a Massachusetts Democrat, blah, 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 and I support Mitt Romney. This says a lot about his character, I think. The following year, not having learned from his mistake, not having seen the error of his ways in that one moment, he did it a second time. He supported the second Mitt Romney gubernatorial race, endorsed in the second time. And that was kind of Rocky Anderson in 2002. He was a Democrat, a moderate Democrat, supporting Republican nominees on the other side of the country. He was not some, justice-oriented, break from the Democrats, honest, truth-seeking person that he's trying to portray himself as now. He was more of a politician's politician. And I don't know if that's changed a whole lot. I think it hasn't, actually. That being said, the Justice Party is now in existence. It was just about a year ago that Rocky Anderson broke from the Democrats, writing like a scathing letter to the DCC, which is the election committee for the Democrats, saying that, essentially paraphrasing, that the Democrats hadn't stepped up to the line. They weren't fulfilling their commitments to the people, to their supporters. And said he'd no longer support the Democratic Party or send funds to the election committee. After this happened, there was talk that he'd, run again for either senator or congressman for Utah. But he didn't do that. He decided to work with some people and create a party, their Justice Party. And until the last couple of months, it was basically just a website, an idea with a few volunteers. But now they've mobilized, they've gone on ballots in 2 states, Mississippi and Utah. 2 other parties they're working within 2 other parties. One's the Oregon Progressive Party, and he'll be the candidate for them in Oregon. So the Justice Party didn't get on the ballot in Oregon, but he's on the ballot for them. And then in California, he's one of the possible nominees for the California Peace and Freedom Party, which in 2008 chose Ralph Nader. And now in this election, Ralph Nader is backing Rocky Anderson as the California Peace and Freedom Party candidate. Their Congress, or their deciding election, is this month. So we'll see if he does get on the ballot there. And then he's, let me see if I can find the name, but he found a VP just recently. His name is Luis Rodriguez. He actually worked with a lot of gangs and stuff like that in Los Angeles, I guess. I'm not sure what his history is. I haven't done a lot of work into or studying into him, but apparently he's somebody who carries at least some weight within those circles of kind of more liberal Democrats, things like that. Okay, so when you go on their website, you get an idea that the Justice Party is for real change, right? They're for the legalization of industrial hemp. They're for, all these really populist things, these cool things, environmentalism. They're for immigrant rights. They're for the DREAM Act. They're for many good things, things that I'm not willing to say aren't good. And of course, the Justice Party fails to call for nationalization of the commanding heights of the economy. It is completely not capitalist. It's bourgeois. It has very little working class constituency. The membership is almost exclusively disillusioned Democrats and green liberals who aren't quite happy with the Green Party. I think what this symbolizes is that Rocky Anderson is identifying all these problems, right? Healthcare, immigration, but he has not identified the problem, the source of these problems, right? He's saying let's combat all these problems, but he has not addressed the core root of the problem. And I believe that core root is capitalism itself, right? It's not just corrupt capitalism, it's capitalism. And that's something he hasn't acknowledged yet. And I think that's why we can clearly identify the Justice Party as a reformist party, just like the Democrats, although it is a break from the Democrats. I think when Rocky Anderson calls for justice, right, we have to go back to the original question I asked at the beginning, or the statement I made, and that is, whose justice, right? Like, whose justice is Rocky Anderson fighting for? As a socialist, I'm not interested in capitalist justice. I'm not interested in bourgeois justice. I'm only interested in a working class oriented justice, right? right? Justice for the working class. And keeping in mind that justice is simply a word that people use to get what they want, as socialists, we should use this word only in the greater interest of the working class. I can't speak for Rocky Anderson, and I hate to speculate, but I question whether the form of justice we seek is the same form of justice he seeks. As socialists, we need to be supporting and working within mass organizations of workers and pushing for a mass party of labor. That being said, two issues are at hand, I believe, when we're talking about the Justice Party. The first being, should you vote for Rocky Anderson for president? And the second being, what our orientation as leftists, or in my case as socialists, should be towards the Justice Party. On the first hand, Rocky Anderson's on the ballot in Utah. And I don't like to give people the, or give people the sending away message that voting doesn't work, or don't vote. I think we should vote. We should vote no confidence, right? We should vote for third-party candidates who support our ideals, right? Just to send the message at the very least. And if not that, just to support people who get on the ballot to talk about the issues we care about. If Rocky Anderson is the best choice to do that, then there's not going to be a problem with people voting for him. I don't think that's a problem at all. It won't accomplish his presidency, and the party that he's running on is not a platform for change. It's not a platform for revolution. It's not a platform but anything but reformism at this point. That being said, no harm can be done by sending a message to the Democrats that is, we won't vote along your lines anymore. That's good. And hopefully there will be somebody better than Rocky Anderson on the ballot in Utah that we could vote for. But if not, that's fine, in my opinion. And then the second question is, what should our orientation be towards the Justice Party? I don't think the Justice Party is a mass organization at this point. And because of this, it's not something we could participate in, and it's not something we want to participate in. If the Justice Party becomes a mass organization, if it starts drawing in huge sections of the working class, then that will change, right? There will be opportunity to work within the Justice Party. There will be opportunity to push their leadership and their members towards more revolutionary goals. That's not the case at this point. As socialists, we need to be working within unions, within student organizations, and within immigrant organizations, mass organizations. If those organizations are reformist, we should push them in a different direction. And ultimately, we should push all those members who are part of the working class in these different organizations towards the creation of a mass party of labor. And once they've formed a mass party of labor, a third-party alternative, like Rocky Anderson's Justice Party, but not like Rocky Anderson's Justice Party, we can ask them to form a socialist program, right, to push for revolution. And we can take sections of that mass organization, we can take sections of the AFL-CIO, we can take sections of the unions, and we can actually have a revolution. That's as it stands right now, I think, with the Justice Party. That's my analysis of it. And I think what we should take away from the current situation right now is that the Justice Party is not an alternative, right? It's clearly not separated from the Democrats in any meaningful way, only in spirit, right? Only in illusionary in an illusory way, I guess I'd say. And to prove that, we simply need to ask ourselves, is anything that Rocky Anderson is pushing for now really that different than what Obama was pushing for in '08? And the answer is no. He's learned from Obama's mistakes. He's pushing harder, maybe in certain areas, but the substance is the same, referendum. And that's always going to be a dead end for our class, the working class. That's it. If we'd like to go into a discussion, that'd be good.
Do you want to record the discussion as well?
Let's try, and if nothing happens, then
I can always cut it out if it's not really doing a lot for us.
Yeah, I got a question. So you mentioned that the Justice Party was in favor of legalizing industrial hemp. Do you know what some of their other platforms are besides that?
Yeah, they have a long list. I don't have that list with me, but I can tell you they're for a 4-year college education program that would be free. They're for different environmental initiatives. I can actually pull it up if you want.
Well, I mean, I just need like some highlights. But I mean, for instance, a 4-year free college, that's not something that Obama was pushing for.
Not explicitly, but he's always talked about socializing school, creating new.
Lower payments and things like that.
Yeah.
Payments, but I don't think Obama ever mentioned 2 for 3 years.
I think, you know, if you look at it, it's not too much of a leap to consider the fact that plenty of Democrats are for socializing different school, including Barack Obama.
Yeah, I don't know if Barack Obama is, well, he seems to not be. But right, the fact is that there might be a lot of Democrats that are socialists, for one thing, right? Just because they belong to the Democratic Party doesn't mean all of their views exactly correspond to the current Democratic president, right? They may have all sorts of different left kind of views. That does, just attributing a view to a Democrat doesn't immediately cast them as a reactionary or capitalist or whatever, right? There's a lot of people that belong to the Democratic Party. The other thing is, so you're talking about pushing for a mass party of labor, right? Now, when parties form, they're not instantly massive. They have to grow, right? So it seems to me that there needs to, besides just the sheer numbers of the thing, which is what you brought up earlier, there needs to be some other substantive difference between what the Justice Party is doing and what you would see as a mass party of labor doing. And you also, right, since you guys are calling it a mass party of labor, not a mass socialist party or something like that, it doesn't seem that that requirement is to be explicitly anti-capitalist, which is another thing you denounce the Justice Party for doing. So could you please lay out exactly what you find the difference to be in what you propose as a mass party of labor and what the Justice Party is?
Sure. Well, first let me address the Democrat thing. I think the Democratic Party is fundamentally bourgeois. Their interests are bourgeois, and there is no, it's not even a reformist party. It's blatantly a capitalist party.
Right.
Secondary, why would a labor party without anti-capitalist principles be different than the Justice Party? That's the question.
Yeah.
Okay. The answer to that, I'd say, is that it would be fundamentally made up and built by workers, right? The question isn't that unions aren't, well, for example, unions are not anti-capitalist. Now, the unions aren't Democrat either. The leadership is bought and paid for by the Democrats, but the rank and file is not necessarily anti-capitalist, and the goal of the unions is not anti-capitalist. We still support them. Why? Because they're workers' organizations. They're working class in nature. Something like a mass party of labor, you're correct. does have to be formed over time, and that's why we're a campaign, we're not a party. We think ultimately that we can't just fight for that and create it. We have to seed the idea of a campaign for a mass party of labor and push for members of the working class who are part of the Democrats or sympathetic to the Democrats or part of organizations that have historically backed the Democrats to break from the Democrats and create their own party, separate from their own economic institutions, the unions, but to create a party. And that's not what the Justice Party has done. The Justice Party isn't even an anti-capitalist organization in the United States fighting for these things, fighting for progressive things. It's simply a bourgeois party. Now that's a separate argument. It's not from the working class, it's not built by the working class, and it's not oriented towards the working class, right? And then also, it's simply a bourgeois reformist organization. And I think the difference is essentially that we wouldn't expect the unions to be anti-capitalist at this point, and we wouldn't expect a labor party or a mass organization of labor organizations, or a mass organization or a mass party of labor to be anti-capitalist at this point. But nonetheless, our stance is always that we're revolutionary socialists, revolutionary international socialists, and that we're always pushing those mass organizations, whether they be economic or political, towards socialist international revolution.
Oh, I was just gonna say real fast on that, like, just adding to what Jake said, the thing about the working class is that, I mean, obviously everyone agrees, it's an inherently anti-capitalist class, just by itself. Like, its interests are inherently opposed to capitalism, whether it recognizes this or not, whether it actually is actively, openly socialist, or whether it just, screws the boss over by not going to off for break, soon enough, because it wants to spend more time hanging out. Like, the reality is, the working class inherently, in order for them to make, have a decent existence, they've got to attack the condition, or they've got to attack capital. That's just the way it is. That's where they make their money, and capitalists make their money off of workers. So the reality is, if you have a mass party of labor, like, socialists are always going to be in favor of socialism within that mass party of labor. But if you have the beginnings of an ability for workers to politically organize whatever their position are, whatever their position is, if we have the vast majority of that class and their organizations making up that party, we have a real chance of pushing them in a socialist and a revolutionary direction. So, I think that's the key thing, is understanding that class composition is fundamental in everything, all revolutionary movements all over the world at all times. So,
when talking about various political parties, right, since you've made it clear that it's not exactly its position on capitalism that makes it, right, a labor party or not, it's whether it is a working class party. How exactly does one adjudicate what is a working class party and what is not? It can't simply be based on its membership of working class people, otherwise it would definitely be the Republicans would be the working class party or something like that. So what method have you used to decide that the Justice Party is not composed of working class people?
I don't think it's fundamentally a question of quantity. It's more a question of the principled positions that the party takes and the interest in which the party is fighting. If a party is fighting for labor rights, if a party is fighting for workers' rights, and there are members that are, professionals, it's still a working class party. It's still a party fighting for working class interests. Now, it is correct that in looking at the Justice Party's program, there's very little mention, of labor rights or of programs specifically oriented towards working class people or people who are working. A lot of it is focused on the interests of the same interests that the liberals are fighting for, right? The Democrats are fighting for, and that is, yes, war, but decreased war. Increase taxes on the wealthy, but keep the wealthy wealthy. These kinds of things. things. It's not fighting for workers' rights explicitly, it's simply fighting for these reformist reforms, right? And I think that's what the answer is. It's not the membership, it's the position and orientation of the party. And I think you need a scientific analysis of that orientation.
Jacob Jensen.
Yeah, two things I wanted to mention is, it seemed to me like there's something you need to clarify in there, and that is, at first you talk about the qualitative nature of a workers' party, but then you constantly bring up this word mass party of labor, which seems to have both a qualitative and a quantitative nature to it as well. I was wondering if maybe you could parse out exactly what you mean by that. And when is it that the quantitative movement of mass people, as Josh pointed out, right? If it's going solely by the numbers, then it comes to working class Joes and factories and stuff like that, then the Republican Party would be by definition, the mass party of labor. So where is it that the qualitative distinction allows that sort of theoretical distinction to become a quote-unquote real Scotsman of a mass party of labor? Where's the qualitative flip? And it's not merely just a matter of numbers. So that's a matter of qualification. I just want an answer on that, that's all. Step two is, and this goes more directly to talking about supporting Rocky Anderson and his Justice Party, is you seem to mention that you don't discourage voting in either a principled way or like a matter of just a matter of practicality. But you did mention that it would be good to vote for somebody like Rocky Anderson as a third candidate, so that way you could get a player on the field in a matter of sense. I want to know why you think that is good, or why you think that would further on socialist ideals. The reason why I ask this question is, there's lots of candidates, both in the Republicans, the Democrats, and third parties, that want to make it all about getting their message out. And that's why it is that we should support, or they should run for them rather than the front runner. It sounds to me like we're engaging in that sort of reasoning, and not only that, engaging in the sort of logic of capital and the representation of capital if we were to support somebody like Rocky Anderson. The last thing we want is for the United States to get all these additional welfare state programs and save the environment, and then all do it in the name of capitalism. I mean, and if we keep on endorsing somebody like Rocky Anderson and keep on getting that message on the field, that's a potential consequence. So I want to know what you think the potential good consequences and negative consequences of supporting a third-party candidate like Anderson would be in Utah. And those are my two questions.
Okay, let me try to address the first one really quick, and then if I've forgotten what the second one is by the time, you can remind me.
I think it would do an injustice to your position to address it really quickly. Take your time.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, you're right. There is a perceived contradiction that, yes, we're talking about the program of the party being working class oriented, but yes, it has to be made up of working class members. When I said that it's not necessarily the quantity, I didn't mean the amount. I meant the percentages, maybe. The membership does not have to be solely working class. But obviously, if it's a mass party of labor, which is what we're in favor of, it has to be it has to have the constituents of all of the current economic organizations of the working class, and those economic institutions are not in support of the Republicans. They're in support of the Democrats. The AFL-CIO, all of the unions who are represented in the AFL-CIO, are all oriented towards the Democrats. And now, a mass party of labor would be the change, right? Those economic institutions that are currently working class would now be oriented and would now be pushing for this mass party of labor and would be working within it. And that's how we identify it. Now obviously, like I said, there could be professionals, students, even people who would be considered part of the petite bourgeoisie, and that would be part of this mass party of labor. But it would be oriented towards these economic institutions that are working class. And again, I think just because the mass amount of rural Americans are in favor of the Republican Party, I don't think that's actually representative of the working class. Most of the most oppressed people in this country are in favor of the Democrats and the reformism of the Democrats. They're the ones who best represent the working class, and they're the ones who we don't want to be voting for the Democrats. We don't want to have them pushing for reformism. We want them to be participating in their economic workers organizations and be forming, because they currently don't have a working class political organization. And that would be a working class party, mass party of labor.
May I?
Yeah.
I feel like you've sidestepped the problem. I think you've given a good explanation of what it is, or the sort of strategy moving forward about how to form a party of mass organization. What I'm asking you is, you made a sort of dichotomy versus a qualitative nature that the party would have, as in the type of things it would support, versus the actual qualitative and qualitative character that would be necessary to actually form that party.
Right.
Like, obviously, in a country like the United States, and in any country, the working class may support things that are backwards. Like, they may be like anti-immigrant and things like this. And what I'm asking you is, how would you sort the very reality of a mass form of organization, a mass party of organization, from the qualitative character that you said that it would possess? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Not completely. Maybe I could try out and then see if I understand, and then you can
Sure.
clarify. So I think my perception is still that, or maybe it would help if I clarify the position that it's not simply about a party with the right position. If the party is created and does not have the support of these economic institutions, these economic working institutions like the AFL-CIO, at least a section or a large percentage of these organizations, that doesn't qualify as a mass party of labor. Might have the right program, might have the right orientation, but it's not mass. It's not something we can work within, and it's not something that can result in our ultimate goals that we're pushing for, and that we're using or promoting a campaign for a mass party of labor for. Does that explain it? Or clarify my position before that might have been a little confusing and contradictory?
It doesn't, but I think Michael Brumis has something to add. Is that what you were trying to
Yes.
gesture towards?
That's what I'm trying to gesture towards.
And then maybe we can move on to the second half of my question.
Sure.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say a couple things. As to the quality and quantity of it, yeah, I totally disagree that Republicans have anything to do with the working class party. Maybe this is like the Archie Bunker myth that's been spread, but it's a lie. The reality is that the vast majority of working people don't give a rat's ass who wins. And the truth is, the reason why it might be even interesting or important for a third party to win in the first place, or to even support it, or to consider supporting it, is only because those working people are fractured from any party besides the Democrats or Republicans, or not voting. And so it might be worthwhile to, maybe, to take a look at the party. If there's a party where there are working people coalescing, maybe jump in and push for a labor party within that campaign, Rarely are those campaigns opposed to the idea. We were involved with the Cynthia McKinney campaign, and it was a big part. They were completely down with the Labor Party. In fact, Rosa Clemente, the vice presidential candidate, actually talked about everyone going on general strike till they got everything they needed, to survive. Which, that's her conception, but it still shows that there's an orientation toward labor. As for quality and quantity, yeah, now keep in mind when you're talking about the mass organizations of labor, obviously when you're talking about unions typically only represent the top layer, the aristocracy of labor. And that's a problem. And that actually shows one of the reasons why they're conservative. The reality is, though, socialists within have always functioned, Marxists, I should say, because there's plenty of people who call themselves socialists. Marxists have always functioned within the mass organizations of working people, whether they're parties or whether they're unions, as a means of pushing for a revolutionary programmatic within that particular organization. Within unions, a genuine Marxist, I think, would push for like a left-wing and hopefully a revolutionary caucus within that union to at least push for a program that they can fight for that's socialist. That would also include pushing for mass organization of the unorganized, which would help break up that aristocracy of labor. That is actually one of the main reasons why the union remains as conservative, like I said. But as far as the actual nature of the party, we don't push for a mass party of labor that's not socialist. We push for a mass party of labor that is socialist. However, we also are pushing for any kind of left, any kind of mass party of labor that we can work within. We would be willing to do that as well. The main thing, our program doesn't change though. What we're in favor of is always going to be socialism and revolutionary socialism. As for the earlier point about Obama, I think what Jake was trying to say, and I don't want to change, if we maybe have different opinions, but I think we're probably on the same track on this. It's not that necessarily Obama himself has a program. The Democratic Party has a platform. That particular platform is extremely vague. And if you read those programmatic platform pieces, they're very similar to Justice Party's, just not as explicit. And Justice Party, frankly, is extremely vague on its own. So when they talk about things in very loose, meaningless ways. It probably would be good to pull up the program if we can. If we can't, that's fine. But people can pull it up if they want to on the Democratic Party platform on the Democrats page. Yeah. So again, what the vanguard, what the proletariat actually represents, it's not just going to be the unions. However, that is the only way that workers can organize. There's no other way that's ever been found aside from Soviets, which still have a union component to them. And that only happens typically, only happens at the beginnings of a revolution, or even in the middle of one, is the formation of workers' councils. But before that point, we have unions. Unions are the only way that workers have of expressing themselves in an organized way. So regardless of the limitations that are inherent within functioning within unions and pushing for unions to take and create their own party that represents working people as a whole with a socialist program, there's not really any other way to do it, in our view. And if you look at all the revolutions, or I should say all the crises and protests that are happening throughout Europe, you see the parties that are rising. We are actually in all of those parties. And that's why we know for a fact that this is the right strategy, because it's worked in every other place. It's been the place where workers go. They go to their traditional mass organization, even if it's just to tear out the good part of it to build a new one. So.
Do you want to go to the second part of your question? I think it had to do with...
I think it does dovetail a little bit into what we're talking about. The one thing, though, that actually, let's reserve those questions, because these kind of seem like not IMT strategy questions, WIL strategies. I wanted to talk more about the topic at hand, so why don't we move on to the second half?
The second half of your question?
Yes.
Sounds
About why it is that we support Rocky Anderson, and what do you consider the advantages and disadvantages of making that decision?
Well, first of all, the Workers International League has not endorsed Rocky Anderson. I don't perceive that we will be endorsing Rocky Anderson or the Justice Party. I think my main concern is that too often socialists are confronted with the question, well, who should I vote for? You don't like the Democrats, you don't like the Republicans, what do you suggest I do? Should I vote for Ron Paul? No, you shouldn't vote for Ron Paul. Should I just vote for Bob Dylan or Big Bird? it's not a horrible idea, it's not as bad as voting for Ron Paul, but it's not substantive to, because there is one gain we can get out of these bourgeois elections, and that isn't office. We will never win an office with a candidate that fights for our interests under this system. That's really not going to happen. And if it does happen, it's going to happen in an almost meaningless way. But what we can take from these elections is win somebody like Cynthia McKinney, or win somebody who challenges the environmental policies of the Democratic Party, who challenges the labor policies of the Democratic Party, gets into the debates, starts going around the country. That's a positive thing, because it allows us to talk about our ideas in a time period where all politics are concentrated on the presidential election. If we step outside of that and we don't participate in that, it's not the end of the world, but we're losing an opportunity. When all eyes of the country and even the periphery of the world are focused on the US presidential election, what better way to get our message across than say, well, this is the kind of person in general we'd want to be a president if we had a president, and how their ideas are actually really good and are actually a substantive alternative to Democrats, and also breaks the dichotomy, right? Or sorry, that's not the word. I can't think of the right word, but the
False dichotomy.
Right, the false dichotomy between the Democrats and the Republicans. And I think that wasn't quite what I was meaning. What I was meaning is the two-party system that people can't really get out of, right? We can't have a third party in the United States. This is an idea that is accepted by the majority of people. And I think until we conceive of a different party with different orientation and a different makeup, with different leadership, we won't be able to form a meaningful revolutionary movement that is as massive as we will need it to be.
So does Rocky Anderson fit that bill? I
No.
mean, well, I mean, not to that last concern you just had, but whether or not it actually genuinely brings something new to the discourse. I hear two different things from you, which is, of course we shouldn't support Ron Paul. Well, of course we shouldn't support Rocky Anderson either. And this isn't an argument, well, that's it, we should support just whoever, right? But I literally heard you say in your presentation that, and merely minutes ago, that his platform is basically Obama's in 2008.
Right.
Now, wouldn't we, in a certain sense, be voting for more of the same, but with a different face, a wider face even?
Yeah, we would. And that's why, like, if Rocky Anderson ever won, it wouldn't lead to anything substantive. But what we can accept is that...
But we're not really adding anything to the discourse if it's really the same campaign, isn't it?
I think I disagree. Because
Okay.
Rocky Anderson's campaign at this point is very different than the existing Barack Obama campaign that's happening right now, right? The pro-war, very conservative campaign that he's launching. The campaign he ran in 2008 wasn't terribly bad, actually. He talked about a lot of issues that need to be talked about: healthcare, single payer. Talked about the problems of war. He didn't, deliver on those, and I wouldn't expect Rocky Anderson to deliver on those. But if Barack Obama was today running the same campaign that he ran in 2008, I wouldn't think it was a bad thing, especially if there was a Democrat like Obama right now running, or a Democrat like Bill Clinton, or some incumbent Democrat. Barack Obama added something to the international discourse, to the national discourse. But the reality is that just because they say these great things doesn't mean they're going to follow through. And that's why I think Rocky Anderson's ideas are really good. A lot of them are progressive. His ideas on immigration, his ideas on schooling are good ideas. He has no capability of following through with that in this system. Nonetheless, they should be talked about during the presidential election. The environment should be talked about. education should be talked about. In this election, undoubtedly, the talk about healthcare is not going to go anywhere near a socialist healthcare system or a socialized healthcare system. Why? Because Obama, wants to defend his healthcare system. I think it would be a benefit to have a third-party candidate talking about an actual socialized healthcare system. Does that kind of explain or answer your question?
It does answer my question.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, as far as Rocky Anderson goes, the fundamental difference between Rocky Anderson and someone like Cynthia McKinney is that he doesn't have a working class following. And I can say, as far as that goes, although Cynthia McKinney didn't have any trade unions that were following her, looking at the situation in the Gulf, when there was the Reconstruction Party that was arising, that was actually bringing a lot of support, especially from black trade union leadership for the Reconstruction Party. It was actually a place where we could talk to specific working people and even people within unions about a labor party, where we could also push for a campaign with someone who wouldn't have any ties to the capitalist class, which is an important thing. That's an important distinction. Even when you have a bourgeois politician, what are their actual ties with the capitalist class? What is their funding like? The reality is Cynthia McKinney had zero, and in fact was even totally torpedoed by her own party, by the Green Party, that wanted Obama. So that's what Rocky lacks. Honestly, with his program is, like I was saying before, the Democratic Party has a program. They have a platform. It's just extremely vague. Rocky just slightly decreases the vagary. Actually, his initial platform had nothing in it. It was even more vague than the Democrats, if you can believe it, just because there was less points on it. But now it's more detailed. I guess the key question is, are we going to support Rocky Anderson? We're not. And the reason is because working people are not coalescing around Rocky. Same reason we didn't support Nader in 2004, although we did in 2000. Because 2000, and also there was a bit of a qualitative change in this program, which started dovetailing with the ultra-right. But aside from that, in 2000, there was real, especially union support for Nader. There was a big groundswell around Nader among the working class. That's why we were interested in him. Rocky is much more like Nader in 2004, minus the whole doing a tour with Pat Buchanan thing. Aside from that, here's the question though. To me, I don't really care about third parties per se. And I don't think that when it comes down to it, the two-party system, I think it's going to split on its own. And in fact, it's dissolving right now as we speak. And the reality is, the only reason we've had a two-party system, and the only reason any country has a two-party system, and that's most of the liberal democracies, is because there's been stable capitalist economies within those countries. That's dissipating. So these parties that directly represent the capitalists are going to have to be replaced by more radical parties that indirectly represent the capitalist class. And I think that's going to be true in the United States as well. We already hear populist rhetoric from the ultra-right, or kind of playing to the ultra-right within the Republicans, playing to pseudo-socialism within the Democrats, although what they actually do is nothing. Both sides. Because they're both tied to big business. But the reality is another party within those parties is at this moment forming. And maybe the Justice Party is the beginnings of that left bourgeois populist party, who knows? But the point is, the two-party system is going to break on its own. Our question is not, do we need to break the two-party system, in my opinion. The question is, how are we going to create a mass proletarian revolutionary socialist party? So for me, when it comes down to who we're going to vote for, the real question when it comes to 2012 is when someone comes up to you and says, I'm going to vote for Rocky Anderson, do we shit on him? Or do we say, oh, that's interesting, well, do you know about this and this and this, and I'm a socialist, and these things are actually not going to go all the way in that direction. I am glad that you're breaking from the Democrats, et cetera, et cetera. It's a way of talking to people and not trying to alienate them. But at the same time, I think that it's important that we don't push for support for Rocky Anderson precisely because there isn't that support from working people for Rocky. There is no coalescing around him, at least at this point. So, and because of that, and I just want to make one last point, because of that, that means very big things as far as how we can affect their campaign. If we have working people that are actually the basis of a political figure, we have a means for changing their program. We can actually talk to the rank and file and push for a change within program. That's something we can't do when we have a bourgeois populace, and it's certainly not something we do with a Democrat or Republican that's funded entirely by the capitalist class, where what we say makes no difference whatsoever.
So you're saying that if working people suddenly supported Rocky Anderson, then you would also support it, but with the intention of pushing Rocky Anderson in a different direction? Is that what you're saying? You're saying you're capable of doing that with Rocky Anderson because what again?
When you have, the question is, what is the class basis for a candidate, right? If a class basis, like if we were to go and protest, and we had this discussion in USJ, United for Social Justice down in Salt Lake, quite a bit, is little things here and there that really point to your orientation. The liberals within the coalition were pushing for signs to be pointed toward Congress or toward the Utah legislature, right? The revolutionaries in general, and also people who were further to the left, wanted us to point it outward toward the masses. And I think this is an important thing to understand is why that was. The reason is because we don't think that we're going to convince the people within the legislature of anything, because their basis, their class basis is the capitalist class. If you want to pay them an enormous amount of money for their campaign, you might get a private conversation with them, you know? That's not the case. We cannot, with all of our money put together, match the capitalist class and the money that they can put together. This is one of the reasons the unions will never be able to control the Democrats as much as they would like to. Now, when the class basis is the working class, you can see huge factions arising within the mass organizations, and we see this, for example, in the French Communist Party, where you have further and further left candidates that get elected or supported because the mass basis, the working class within that party, is opposed to the people who have been part of the consensus within the capitalist government for the past period that's led to their mass economic collapse. So that's an important aspect. The quantitative aspect is very important. It's a way it's the basis for which we can make a change within programs. We can actually make a change within the party, and if we can't, if it's impossible to do so, and the working class decides to break from that party, as happened with different parties within the Social Democrats within Venezuela, the Social Democrats and the Communist parties that broke from it and formed the movement for the Fifth Republic. Why did that happen? Because they wanted something to the left. Same with the CTV within Venezuela and the revolutionary unions that were in favor of Chavez. They made a break. The masses within these unions left the bureaucracy behind because the bureaucracy wouldn't change to the interests of the masses. This is a very different fundamental mechanism that exists within the Democrats and Republicans. So I guess I'll just leave it at that.
I like your example of Venezuela, but where I see a qualitative difference as opposed to a quantitative difference in regards to mass people, mass working people, supporting whomever or whatever party, is the qualitative difference of what defines someone as working class. Because there's a lot of white working class people who, by a qualitative sense, qualify as working class, but have incredibly reactionary and counter-revolutionary ideas and positive. So I don't know. I'm simply skeptical of the idea. I think you've shed a lot of light, a lot of great supportive arguments for where you're coming from. Citing Venezuela is where it struck my interest, but how in the United States do you see the reactionary white working class, if you even think that there is a white working class? I know a lot of Maoists disregard that idea. Where do you see the white working class in the United States? I was going to say playing us out, but that awfully references the Bill O'Reilly reference. But do you understand? I mean, what is the
Bill O'Reilly reference?
There's no words there.
There's no words there. And with these white working class people, by all qualification, they they're reactionary as they get. And so are there any things aside from that, because I feel like that's a core contradiction within the United States, Venezuela, potentially maybe there are race relations and class relations, thusly it differ from the United States.
Right,
Not entirely familiar.
but they're the minority, right, whereas here they're down here.
Right, so what is the relationship with the white working class qualitatively, because they don't own the means of production, even though they're reactionary as they get. What's the relationship between them and like these sorts of, you know, progressive candidates?
Because the question was fielded towards Michael's last comment, I think Michael can cover that.
Okay.
And then I can finish up, I guess, or tag on any opinions of mine.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, I thoroughly disagree with the idea that there's no white working class in America. I think that the vast majority of America is made up of working people. That doesn't mean that the
Can we
vast
just
majority
head
is-
off this? He didn't say that.
Yeah, I'm not asserting that position, I'm saying
but-
many do.
He said many do, and so Michael Brumis is responding to the position that many do.
Right,
Many
that's fine.
do.
Many, right, what Brett said was many Maoists believe that there is no such thing as a white working class here in America. So Michael Brumis is responding to that.
Well, I think the overall question, correct me if I'm wrong, of not mischaracterizing you, but you were saying that there is a white working class, but that they have a genuinely and qualitatively different political character and motive due to the fact that it's not merely an issue of working class versus non-working class, but also deals with other things like race and also who's the beneficiary of all these, like say, that would be what you were, hopefully a generous way of putting it, right?
Yes.
So maybe we could head off a confusion first by not putting that on Brett, because I'm pretty sure you know also that's not what he was saying.
Right, absolutely.
Well, no, I'm speaking to Mike.
Well,
You
no,
knew
here's
he
the-
wasn't saying that,
That's a
right?
good clarification.
No, actually, he did intimate that that was a possibility. He did say many Maoists don't recognize that there even is a white working class. So I wanted to address that first. I am going to get to the main issue as well.
Okay.
But he did say that.
No,
And you can play
that
the
was
feedback if you
definitely
like.
said. Also, if he said that that's what he was saying, he would have just said, "I believe this."
Okay, fair enough. But I think it's an important thing to make, to let people know as far as like our position on the working class.
Yeah.
It's not a minority, it is a majority of working people within this country. Now, as far as the reactionary nature of the working class, again, I think that this is extremely overblown. And I think a lot of what people consider the working class is an invention of the capitalist media. And I think the reality of that is, look at how many people supported Occupy compared to how many people supported the Tea Party. Like the Tea Party had this big, fanfare. It was all these news media was talking about. Fox News was going on. This is like it was 24-hour like Tea Party watch. Ignoring like real stories to go to the Tea Party. But the reality is, it was never more than 10% of the population that ever supported the Tea Party. Now, as far as Occupy, they did surveys, the Pew Research surveys did surveys showing from 40% to above 50% of the population supporting Occupy. Now, we can argue about what Occupy represents, but I don't think anybody disagrees, and maybe I shouldn't say that. Here's my opinion, maybe people will disagree. Occupy, in my opinion, while it has it's all about reformism and it's all about populism, when you're talking about the actual programmatics of the movement, it's left-leaning. It's moving in the direction, or it has been moving, or it was moving in the direction of the left. It was moving toward a socialist concept. Anything that you heard in Occupy, you could reformulate and explain in a socialist way. And people would many times, not all the time, and with many exceptions, in general, would either agree with you or come very close to agreeing with you. I think this is a total myth. I think the reality is if you break down working people based on their individual positions, which many research studies have done by the bourgeoisie, so they have no interest in.
Their political positions as opposed to the relationship to the means of production. production, is what you're saying?
No, I'm saying their political positions in relation to being left or right are in general on the left, or moving toward the left. As far as the owning the means of production, you're talking about like the class, are you talking about like whether they actually are workers in terms of like the Marxist definition of workers?
Yes.
Okay, well that actually does go back to that question that you were saying you didn't ask. It's a question of whether these are actual workers or not, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that question was asked, just to clarify that. Before we get to that point, let me just say really quickly as far as the reaction nature, or as far as the subjective versus the objective conditions in the country. I think that when it comes down to the working class, there is a reason we need a vanguard socialist party. And that is precisely that the working class as a whole is not going to generalize its own interests in a theoretical way the way a vanguard party will. There's an absolute need for a vanguard party to lead the revolution to a successful conclusion. And I think history has shown that. That's why we're for that. That's why we recognize that. I don't think that's true of just America, though. I think that's true of every country in the world. There's no country in the world without a revolutionary party, especially post-Soviet Union, that's going to achieve an end to capitalism without building a vanguard revolutionary mass party of socialism. You know, to generalize those historical experiences and express them in a theoretical way that working people can actually grab onto and can have them lead them toward the successful conclusion to a revolution. That being said, I do think that the working people, and we'll classify whether they're working people in just a second, within this country are totally on board, I think, or at least moving in that direction. And I think especially as this whole system starts crumbling, and it already is, especially with the European sovereign debt crisis that's going on, that's already infecting us. The US, I guess us indirectly through the US, it's going to even expose further any reformist illusions that workers have, which I contend is the vast majority of illusions that they have. Not reactionary dreams, but reformist illusions. Now, as far as whether they're workers or not, that's a deeper question. I would say they are, even though the vast majority of working people in this country are service workers, consider that they still, the only thing that they actually have as a means of actually like surviving is their hands, their ability to work. They actually go into a workplace, they work for a capitalist, they produce some kind of value, and service, you can understand service in terms of value, right? That's all they have. And that, if you look at the classical definition of Marx, as far as the proletariat, that's the proletariat. It's not the industrial proletariat. There is an industrial proletariat as well, and they do have much more power because they have the ability to shut down at the very source everything. Now that also means that in a certain sense, other countries have more power and more weight than the United States, in a certain sense, in the sense that many of the fundamental things are actually made in other countries and shipped to the United States. And more now with the advent of imperialist globalization, as Fred Goldstein puts it, than ever before, you know? But that doesn't mean that there's still not the service component of working people, you know? You work at Big O Tires, as far as I'm concerned, you're still a worker. You work at McDonald's, you work at Wendy's, I've worked there, you're still a worker. It does mean there's a difference, like when I was thinking about organizing the Wendy's, like the concept of trying to organize that compared to organizing some huge ass like Vietnamese factory with thousands and thousands of workers, that's a totally different thing, you know? You've got to get like 10, 20, 30 different workplaces all together, unified. But I would still contend that they still fit the classic definition of the working class, and they still, on its most fundamental levels at least, and it still has the same, or on a relative level, the same qualitative interests as workers everywhere around the world.
It seems to me with your whole last thing about whether there's a white working class or not, you started talking about, instead of like what the real issue was, you talked about something that nobody cared about, which is whether this is a service economy or not, right? What Brett's point is not that, oh, like, you know, we've deindustrialized, therefore, you know, regardless of people's relationships and means of production, that means that we're not real workers. The real issue is the point that you made, which is, oh, well, they don't own their own means of their own reproduction, right? So therefore, they are workers by the classic definition, and you said that's all they own. But the real issue here is not that, right? It's about a specific segment of the working class here in the United States that does own more than that. And what they own more than that is their white privilege that enables them to get better health care, have better access to jobs, and to get paid more than other workers here in the United States. So, yeah, how would you respond to that? Address that issue as opposed to the service economy issue.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I was looking at it in a classic economic sense, which is what I thought he was talking about. If you're talking about white privilege, which would be another aspect of that, differentiation within the working class, right?
Josh is just adding he's emphasizing from a mouse perspective, the race card. When I was wondering, you made a great supportive argument as to what qualifies a worker as such, but I'm interested in branching out of that, which is, I think, right where you're coming from, emphasizing white privilege and its regard to, building parties.
Sure. Well, I think there is a huge gap between the conditions of white workers and black workers. Specifically, there's probably at this point a larger gap between white workers and immigrant workers, and there's a gap between black workers and immigrant workers. I would say qualitatively, in my opinion, regardless of the fact that there is privilege for white workers, there still is qualitatively the same interest. And the reason why I say that is because, as an example, when I used to work at Farmer John's, right? I worked at Farmer John's, I was the only white employee there. There was one other white employee. There were maybe 10% of the employees out of 1,200 people that worked there, 10% of them maybe were black. The rest were undocumented or not undocumented immigrants. Many of them undocumented, many not. So what were the wage differences? I don't know for sure, and this is anecdotal. But I will say that when I went in to apply for a job, my friend who was a Latina went in to apply for a job, and my friend who was black went in to apply for a job. We all got different wages out of that interview. I got $7.50 an hour. He got $7. She got the minimum wage, right? As what they were willing to offer. And that might not seem like a lot, but when you're that poor, it's huge. It's huge. It makes a huge difference in living standards. But consider the fact that the whites within that company, if they were to oppose the interests of Latinos or blacks, their wage is still $7.50. The reality is it works against their class interest, because if they unite together, they can make 15. And this is something that I talked to a lot of them. A lot of them had racist ideas about everyone else. Anyone who was black, I shouldn't say that. Most people who were black hated everyone who was Latino, but liked the whites. Most of the people who were Latino hated the blacks and loved the whites. There's an interesting thing there. All this thing in the media about how whites are.
Everyone wants to be white in America.
Everyone wants to be white. That's the truth. That's the actual truth. Not the opposite. Not the opposite at all. But the reality is that when I talked about the unity among all of us together, instead of the Latinos saying, "Oh, I worked so hard and I still get less money than this black guy," or the black guy saying, "This guy isn't even documented, he shouldn't even be here," If I mentioned the fact that we could unite together, all of us, and there was a union that existed, although just barely on paper, we could all fight together for a higher wage. And that's the only way that any of us are going to get a higher wage, honestly, when it comes down to it. This is why the white privilege is not enough to make a difference. In fact, actually works against white workers. Any kind of interest in white privilege, and especially as privilege disappears because of the destruction of the economy, because of capitalism, because of the destruction of the old model of imperialism, where you have a division of labor that's totally different. It's not just getting raw materials from the poor countries and manufacturing them in the rich countries, but actually it's destroying the consumer base within the United States and within Europe. More and more white working people automatically have an interest with people who are more oppressed than them. Obviously, I don't think that gap is ever going to disappear under capitalism, and that's the point. That's why anyone who wants to fight for black or Latino liberation needs to fight for socialism, you know, and nothing short of it.
Well,
And just to piggyback, I think, one of your questions was, and how does this relate to building like this mass party of labor? The only way I can see that it does is that perhaps, and I think when I say perhaps, I mean probably, the sections of the mass economic workers organizations that will be most in favor of, or most not susceptible, that's the wrong pronunciation, but most in favor of joining a mass party of labor will be these minority sections of the working class. That being said, all of the sections of the working class have to enter these organizations in some way or another to actually have a meaningful mass party of labor.
A meaningful way of fighting.
Right. They can't enter their own individual groups and expect the same result.
well, real quick, if I may, what time is it?
That's pushing it, but
All right,
You wanna do one more question and then?
We'll just go to Jay Jensen.
Okay, well, it feels like in a lot of ways we've gone far afield. I think that the discussion has made some strides. But I am kind of concerned about staying with the topic a little bit, or at least staying a little bit closer with it. And so this question will be directed towards you, Jake, or anybody else obviously can answer it as well. But given the fact that we know the way that politics work, particularly in the United States, the special conditions in the United States and the formation of the Electoral College and all the facts that, the idea of supporting a third-party candidate is, it's not totally out of range. But let me make the assertion now that when it comes to presidential debates that people see on TV and that CNN will talk about, and other publications that are small little blogs that will never be read by the majority of things, those third-party candidates will never get a voice.
and I do.
I'm not finished yet.
Like if I could just parse that a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like you did before, just to maybe head off like a misconception. That is that when I say that that's enough reason, when I say that I tell somebody, yeah, you can vote for them, it's not in a way that I'd say, yeah, vote for them because getting that person in there, that's going to do it. That's revolutionary. It's enough of a reason for me to say, yeah, go ahead. But that's not where the discussion ends, and it's not a meaningful tactic, right? It's not a hardcore socialist tactic, and it's not a revolutionary tactic. It's simply something that is acceptable, something that I wouldn't criticize somebody for doing. It's actually something that I would expect would be extremely natural amongst sympathizers and people who we bring into socialist organizations. It's very rare that people would jump. And so I'd say that I don't put a lot of weight behind actually having these third-party candidates to spread these issues. It's going to be our responsibility as socialists to get to the working class directly and to spread our socialist ideas that will actually build organizations and push us towards revolutionary action. But please finish your question.
Yeah, I mean, that was very, it was a good comment that you added, but I'm addressing specifically the issues that you were working on in your presentation. Let me make a statement, a stipulation, and then a question. Third-party candidates don't get any real screen time. Even if you're a marginal candidate like Ron Paul, who is actually a Republican, I mean, people that would even massively support his ideas, as reactionary and crazy as they are, still don't know who he is. And so my first assertion is third-party candidates don't get any screen time. So that's a good reason not to support them. Actually, technically, that would be an argument. But anyway, that's my first assertion. The second is if we stipulate that it is possible that third-party candidates could get screen time under some sort of weird legal snafu where money doesn't count and our quote-unquote free press can't just discriminate against them at will, what would you stipulate as the qualifications for whether or not we should support somebody versus not support somebody? Like, say, for instance, Ron Paul has probably, out of all the candidates that we actually get screen time on, probably the best anti-imperialist sort of campaign. I think everybody in this room, it's probably safe to say that they wouldn't support him. But yet you're saying that in a certain way, other candidates who are blatantly liberal, and I mean that in the technical socialist sense, can be beneficial. So I'm asking you to devise some sort of reasoning under which we can exclude some and include others, say liberal candidates.
First of all, it's kind of like meaningless, but I do think like Ron Paul's anti-imperialism is complete bullshit. Fundamentally,
I just said best, not.
Fundamentally he's a capitalist, therefore fundamentally he's an imperialist. If not the results of his positions, right? Just to get that on the record.
Okay, good.
Second,
You've all heard.
Rocky Anderson would probably be a better anti-war candidate. But yeah, let's see. To qualify what would make a candidate worth supporting, I think Michael alluded to it, and that is only if we can use it to relate to the working class, because the working class is coalescing around them in an alternative to the Democrat fashion. If there's mass support for this person, it's going to be completely counterproductive to be pushing in a different direction, or not pushing in a different direction, but not being a part of that movement, right? Or what's going on over there. So if there is massive amounts of working people breaking from the Democrats, supporting this person, that's something we'd want to be in on, not necessarily for reasons, I don't think, for getting them elected, but for being a part of the movement and reaching those people who are excited and who are mobilizing in any way. And that same tactic goes for working class people organizing around any, even if it's a reformist idea that's different than the Democrats, like even like certain immigrant campaigns. If people are working class and they're massing around these organizations, that's somewhere we want to be, to talk to them and to push their ideas forward towards socialist ideas. And I think the same thing goes for a political candidate, right? It's just another movement, people getting behind this person. And that's somewhere we want to be if it's qualitatively different from the Democrats in some way, and it has a working class orientation, and the working class is receptive to it, and if labor unions are receptive to it, especially, because any opportunity to be part of a movement where organized economic organizations that are fundamentally working class are opposing the Democrats or going in a different direction than Democrats is somewhere we want to be. That's somewhere good. That's somewhere that has tons of opportunity.